things. And the analogy I'll give you, which is what I thought of when he first told me about why he found it to be so useful for him. Because not only did it help him as a writer, but he trained with the team and then at 46 years old or something, went and ran a 2:39 marathon PR. So this wasn't just like, oh, I see how they do it and I get why they're successful. It was, no, I have an embodied lived experience of this now. And one of the things that it really reminds me a lot of is the way collegiate runners find so much success being part of a college team.
Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspect of running, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. This week's episode is sponsored by PickyBars. I've been a customer of their real food-based bars since their early days, and they get better and better every year. You can eat them before, during, and after a workout, or anytime really, and they're created from a need to have a performance and real food bar. One of my favorite fueling choices, they offer a variety of flavors including chocolatey, savory, fruity, spicy, and everything in between. Check them out and grab an exclusive For the Long Run listener discount at pickybars.com/FTLR. Have you guys heard of Beam? I have been absolutely loving their products lately. Beam is a CBD company that's making waves in the running world by offering products that combine THC-free CBD with other high-quality ingredients. It was founded by two ex-professional athletes with the idea that everyone should have the chance to experience what better feels like. Whether you're sore or stressed, Beam is key for recovery and self-care. Try it for yourself with 15% off using the code FTLR from beamtlc.com. I recommend Beam Dream Powder or the Focus Capsules. Welcome back. I have Jake Tuber joining me on the podcast today. Jake, thanks so much for taking some time to chat.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here, man. It's great to chat with you.
For sure. For those who can't see, which is everyone, Jake is practicing to be a tarmac employee, and he's got this headset on. And he's directing planes in the video here. So just keep practicing.
That's right. Yeah, the size of the, what do you call, I guess the like earphones, I guess is what you'd call them on an old headset, right? Now there's just earbuds, and I was joking the other day, my father keeps mixing up AirPods and earbuds. He keeps calling them AirBuds, which is just a source of endless joy for me. But great film, all of them. Phenomenal film. Documentaries, nonetheless. And these things are the opposite. These are the bulkiest headphones you could find. But these are my podcast recording headphones because the audio is hopefully better. Normally they sound like this when I'm not on with you. But yeah, this makes me sound much more authoritative. So that's why I'm wearing these.
Sound and look, and that's half the battle, right?
That's right. That's right.
So
it's great to be here.
Before we dive too far into it, who is Jake?
I was hoping you could tell me that today. That's what I was here. I thought that's what we were gonna go over.
Well, you sent me the show notes before we recorded the show.
Man. Yeah. Well, that always sounds much fancier. So, oh man, I would say personally, I'm a dad and a husband and a injured runner and a guy that likes being around other people and rooting on the Boston Celtics, despite having never lived a day in Boston in my life. Interesting backstory there. Professionally, bit of an entrepreneur. So I'm the creator of the Endeavorun Retreat, which I know you'll be at, and others who are probably listening will be at this coming August in Boulder, be our first big retreat. And I run my own practice as an industrial organizational psychologist and executive coach here out of the larger DC area as well. And I'm also a doctoral student, doctoral candidate, and a psychology adjunct professor. And I volunteer with a local track club. And I like staying busy, apparently. The more I keep talking, the more I realize that I guess I like staying busy. But I also like vegging out to reruns of the same 4 or 5 films and shows at night to calm myself down. So I'm not that busy, I guess.
That is quite a background. So
It's a mouthful, that's for sure. That's a nice way
yeah,
of saying it. Thank you.
I've got a lot of questions, but given that it is a running podcast, let's, as I say, set the stage there. So you have a bit of a non-traditional background in running compared to many of the other guests on the podcast who are professional
Really
athletes,
fast? Yeah, I would say
really
actually really
fast.
fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, got it.
And you work with them, and many of them you work with as coaches or speakers or whatnot. So talk to me about why running. How did you get into the sport? And we'll go from there.
Sure. So running was something like for a lot of folks to stay in shape for other sports in high school, and I was pretty good at it and took it pretty seriously at a small high school in New York that did not take running seriously. We had a misshapen track that was something like 408 meters and had three straightaways. I make it sound like I went to some terribly underfunded school. It's not an excellent public school, but it was just they didn't care about running. We had in the 5 seasons I ran in high school, we had a different head coach. I think every season, it was just kind of a mess, and so I was mostly self-taught and ran briefly at college before some injuries and really some mental burnout as well. And then was away from the sport in any meaningful way for a long time. Was a track and field fan. Was always kind of a fan of the sport. Would try to watch it whenever it was on in limited amounts. And then several years ago, I decided that I really wanted to try to get back in shape in general, and I wanted to use running as that vehicle and discovered distance running. I was a sprinter and a jumper in high school and college. And so kind of looking at it as an aerobic sport was kind of different for me, and discovering how that works and really fell in love with the sport of running, and also have a lot of friends and colleagues who just from a variety of strange coincidences and whatnot happen to be currently involved in the world of professional running and track and field. And that was a natural extension of my desire to run and being able to learn from them and trying to help them as well. So my sort of reemergence into the running world is kind of having a second life, I would say, in my 30s after being dormant for quite a while. And lately I've been injured. I had been fighting an injury for a long time and still recovering much slower than I had hoped, but I'm getting there. I actually went for a run today, did a 4 mile jog with a fast finish, final half mile in a blistering 3 minutes and 22 seconds. So I call that progress. That used to be easy pace for an opening morning run, but hey, take what we can get right now.
So you're discovering your second life in running. You're in the DC area. Are you following a similar trajectory as Kira D'Amato?
I wish my friend Kira could be a blueprint for myself. Kira had also world-class talent, right? So those who followed Kira's story know that she was a multiple-time All-American in college and then disappeared for a while and picked it back up. I didn't have that sort of genetic proclivity per se, but I would certainly love to follow in her footsteps in terms of the joy that it gives her and the environment around herself that she has built to enhance and sustain that. Certainly don't, and I don't even say this sort of like half self-deprecatingly, that her performance level or anything nearing that is not in the cards. But I would love to be able to take her approach and enthusiasm and mimic that as I get older as well. That's fair.
Yeah, I do love how she is approaching it. I had her on the podcast last year, I guess, at this point, and she talked about like, I'm just having more fun than ever before, and like if you're having that much fun, you've already won by the time you get on the start line.
Absolutely.
So you're another one of those guys who seems to know everyone, and every time it's a conversation with an athlete, it's like you happen to know them, or we share a lot of mutual friends all across the
That's
country,
right.
and the running world is very small, and Twitter and Instagram makes it even smaller. So where did that sort of like networking and being so plugged in come from? Has that always been the way that it has been for you, or is that sort of as the years have gone on, you've found your way into these circles and become friends with these people, and now there's a potential business, or there is a business that has come from it?
Sure. I do think it's really driven by kind of my personality, rather extroverted, and I'm really interested in. I find myself more and more, and this is something I've only more recently realized, but really passionate and motivated by people who are really interested in excelling in whatever field they're in. And the fact that it could be running or track and field, which is something I find really cool and can relate to, that's a bonus, but it's really across the board. And so I think it's sort of been there for a long time. And I don't say that, by the way, to suggest this is something I'm good at or to take credit for it. I really think it's driven just by, the DNA in me that I don't control. This is not something that I think of myself as being deserving of any accolade for. But I think that in terms of the sort of nature of the fact that I'm plugged in, a lot of it is just odd connections. Folks that either my wife was college teammates with in school and they're now pros, and getting to know them and their friends because they were sort of just part of our social circle, or people that I had known a long time ago before they were pros wound up becoming pros, and I've met them and their teams and others around them. And I think the point that you make is a great one, which is it's really a function of the nature of the running world being so small and wanting to be so inclusive and interactive. That is the case that I happen to know a lot of people in different facets of the world, more so than it has much more to do with the nature of the running world than it does with me. I think I'm just one of many people in there who's kind of mired in it. And it's cool. And it is really exciting to be able to talk to so many people at different parts of the sport with frequency. I feel like I'm always learning.
For sure. And so you've taken that and built a brand with it. So Endeavorun is, I think that's how we got connected initially. Somebody must have introduced us to say, hey, you guys should know each other.
My memory is it was actually Jason Fitzgerald,
Yes.
who's probably the source of a lot of things, my memory. But I think that's right. Like many great people that I've met in the running space, it's through building out these elements of this business in particular in the last year or two that's really exploded that.
So what is Endeavorun?
It's a great question. I'm so glad you asked me, and we'll be right back after a word from our. I'm just kidding. Endeavor Run is it's a retreat for recreational runners of all paces and sizes. That's happening this August in Boulder, Colorado, where I know you know very well, from August 5th to the 8th. And the idea is it's sort of like a retreat. It's a combination of a vacation and a workshop. And it's an opportunity to come together with other runners, and we're going to do some track workouts and easy runs, and run on famous Magnolia Road out in Colorado. We have some workshops with some speakers.
My legs are sore just thinking about that.
It's awesome. It's going to be great. We've got some speakers. We have our sports dietitian nutritionist who's going to be there for individual consultation. We've got folks like Jason and Matt Fitzgerald. They're unrelated. We'll both be there. Our other friend, Peter Bromka, a couple pros will be there as well. Some are local and have committed, folks like Addie Bracey and others that you know. A couple others are waiting to see how their summer plans shake out because it's happening at the same time as the Tokyo Olympics. And that's no accident. We wanted that to be a backdrop for the experience so that when we're not running or doing a workshop or listening to a book talk or an athlete panel, we'll be able to hang out and throw on the Olympic marathon or track and field happening at the highest level with other folks who are really excited about running. So it's a retreat that we're putting on to really give folks an opportunity to learn a lot in a short period of time, run in a great place, and supercharge their running is kind of the way I like to think about it, whether it's because folks have a fall race that's on the calendar or they're trying to get back into the swing of things after a year of COVID craziness, or they're really discovering running for the first time and want to go from a hobby jogger to someone who looks at themselves as a runner, give them an opportunity to learn some of the tools and things to do that. So it's kind of drawing on a lot of those elements for a couple of awesome days in Boulder. It should be great.
Yeah, when we initially spoke about this, you were like, actually, no, you hadn't decided on Boulder at the time. I think I had I had probably suggested that. I was like, there's no better place than Boulder, Colorado for this. Where did the genesis? What's the genesis of this? Where did it come from?
So the story comes from Matt Fitzgerald, the endurance sport author that I know a lot of your listeners will know well, 80-20 running and all that. And I had been wanting to work with Matt to coach me through a running and fundraising campaign that I was doing many years ago when we first met. And at the time, Matt was in the middle of Flagstaff, Arizona, embedded with the Northern Arizona Elite Hoka running team for a summer, which later became the impetus for his book, which is excellent, Life is a Marathon, and I highly recommend that. Running the Dream. Life is a Marathon came out just before that. Running the Dream is his book about that experience. And when Matt and I linked up, it was amazing to me how much he, who was as knowledgeable about endurance sports as anyone could be, felt like he was learning and growing simply by being immersed with this team. You know, my image of it was he goes out with this team and they're like, oh, awesome. We have an endurance sport guru here to teach us. And I'm sure he did teach them a little bit, but he learned so much. And this idea of the master becoming student is phenomenally interesting to me. And he was sort of like, man, wouldn't it be awesome if your average amateur could go and train with the pros? I learned so much just through osmosis by being with them. That's what I want to do. And so we originally envisioned Endeavorun to be something that in theory could try to grab as much of that experience as possible, to have like a retreat and then an ongoing team that would potentially happen virtually leading up to some events. And what we realized is that in the world that we're living in right now, what people really wanted was that main event and wanted to try to condense that into something that was a little bit more schedule wise manageable than, you know, bye honey, I'm leaving for 12 weeks to go live with this team in the middle of Arizona, which is what Matt did. So it hasn't completely left the back of my mind that one day to be able to put together an experience where amateurs really are long-term for several weeks or months embedded with a pro team would be something cool to facilitate. But this to me seemed like, and pardon the 80-20 pun here, a way to get a lot of that in a short period of time, a way to really take a lot of the learning of that and put it in a very manageable and fun several days together. So that was really the impetus for this, was wanting to give anybody who wants to take their running to the next level the benefit of seeing how the pros do it, learning from some of the best in the space, and be able to leave an experience feeling like they not only had a great time and had an awesome sort of couple of days of break and vacation, but just went through essentially kind of a well thought out workshop that's going to supercharge their running for them.
It's super cool. So
Thanks.
Obviously Matt must have shared some of the biggest takeaways that he had from his time in Flagstaff. I'm curious, what were those things? What were the things that he shared that are sort of the guiding principles of what you're putting together? And for those who are listening, like, not everyone's going to attend. So let's, frame it within the context of like, how do we learn from that and apply that towards our lives?
I probably owe it to Matt to say the best way to answer that question is to recommend folks grab his book from the library. It is really good, or something like that. And you will get all of it. I would say the things that I would point to that Matt really emphasized to me and has continued to do so, the stickiness of what he said when we talk about that experience for him, was the cumulative effect of living all of the elements of running at the same time. So it wasn't just, okay, like I had this nutrition plan and I have this running plan and I have my buddy I run with, or I have my local running group on Tuesday nights. And occasionally I'll do some strength work that I got from this site. Like, you can cobble all of those together ad hoc. And for your average person, that is worth doing. Yeah. It's more than fine. Like, it can be a key to success. But what he really found was the immersiveness of the environment had a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of impact on him. And I think that's what struck him, or at least that's what sticks out when I talk to him about it. And I was actually talking to him about it earlier today, believe it or not, about what really make that such a powerful experience. And the analogy I'll give you, which is what I thought of when he first told me about why he found it to be so useful for him. Because not only did it help him as a writer, but he trained with the team, and then at 46 years old or something, went and ran a 2:39 marathon PR. So this wasn't just like, oh, I see how they do it and I get why they're successful. It was, no, I have an embodied lived experience of this now. And one of the things that it really reminds me a lot of is the way collegiate runners find so much success being part of a college team. Because it's not just the gym and the weight room and the track and a good coach. It's the fact that they're with others as part of the same journey, sometimes on slightly different journeys at different times. Some are injured, some are in the pool, some are running distance, some are sprinting. But you're going through this experience with others who are equally committed to their own journey, and it's similar to yours. And there's a reason I think that so many good runners have the best running years of their life in college, despite the fact that for anywhere from sprinters to distance folks, your physiological peaks don't happen for 5 to 10 years later for most adults. So something about the collectiveness of that environment is really where the superpower is. And so the sort of three components of Matt's experience that we distill down to, I don't know if I call it the motto, but sort of the tagline for Endeavorun is precision, community, and accountability. And those are the three things that you really get. If I had to pull three variables out of what he got and what we try to give folks in this program, it's a degree of precision in your training and your nutrition and your strength work and your focus and your sleep and your recovery and all that stuff. Accountability by helping you set the goals that you want and put in place the mechanisms to hold yourself accountable, whether it's being put in touch with other folks who are going to be responsible for joint accountability, coaching, et cetera. And then community, to really feel like you're going through that experience with others who are building it themselves. That is sort of the triple threat that we hope adds up to something a little bit greater that really is based on what he typically codifies as the best parts of his experience.
Yeah, those three variables or three principles there. I mean, you can build that in your own life without doing a retreat or without being a professional runner on a team or whatever. I mean, honestly, I think that there's an opportunity for a shoe brand to do like a flyaway program for something like this, and maybe it's powered by Jake at Endeavorun, Jake at State Farm.
Yeah, exactly. We've been talking about that kind of thing. I mean, that's definitely, we have some folks, some great, Inside Tracker and others who are offering great support of the program because they see the potential for that community element. And we have talked to, I won't name them, but we have talked to shoe and apparel brands that want to get involved. And I think that this summer, seeing that hopefully what should be a great success will be continued proof of concept to do that. But at the moment, we're sort of brand agnostic, certainly want to keep it that way unless it becomes so advantageous to our participants and ultimately because of that, the business to do that. But it's definitely something that certainly as an entrepreneur running the business side of things is something we talked about from the beginning. So your mind is appropriately in the right place.
Yeah, I love this idea, right? It's like how do you facilitate someone to enjoy what they love even more? You help foster the fun, you help foster the improvement, and the community and accountability and like togetherness is a fundamental component of that. I spent a month in Boulder before coming back to the East Coast, and I had my the routine people I was running with, and some of them are pros, some of them are elites, some of them have been Olympians in the past, and just like soaking in the warm-ups and the cool downs and the way that Kara Goucher approaches a workout and how she mentally is at rep 8 versus 1 and this and that. It's like you can't teach that stuff in a textbook. You can't read about it online. You can't hear it on a podcast. You have to live it. And I'm a way better runner as a result of what I was doing there. I'm going back there in a few weeks, but even for just a month, like the ability to learn from these people, and I wasn't immersed with them every single day, but the ability to again, like be a part of this community and do the work and see, like, I went out to eat with Noah Droddy and Emma Cortez, and Noah's a 2:09 marathoner, and he's out drinking margaritas and beers just like the rest of us.
That's the secret. That's what I need to do more of.
No, but seriously, like. And I talked with Kara about this too, and I've had this conversation on the podcast a number of times now about this fun or play aspect of it. And there are so many amateurs who are so serious. I've been there, And we need this reminder from the pros that like they're out drinking beers and having margaritas too. And it's that balance. And like right now I'm grappling with the fact that like I'm potentially being a hypocrite because my high school friends asked me to, go out tomorrow night on a Friday. I haven't seen them in a year. And I'm racing a half marathon on Saturday. So I'm like, yeah, I'm good for like 1.5 beers and I'm going home at 8:30. And so I'm like, am I being hypocritical or not? But like, anyway,
It's a good point. I mean, I will say though that, I can't speak for Noah. Noah's such a cool guy. He may be different, but in general, I imagine if the pro runners who, to your point, have much more of a balance than we might expect,
right.
they might actually be taking, their beer intake much more seriously if they were as out of shape as I was trying to get back. You know what I mean? Like there's something to be said for the fact that like, yeah, once you're already kind of at the peak of your physical pyramid, a calorie is a calorie, and hanging out and loosen it up is actually so good for you mentally that it outweighs anything that would be potentially physiologically suboptimal about it. But I do think that, if Noah was in, 240 marathon shape, trying to get back to 209, I don't know, maybe not, but my sense is there'd probably be a little bit more conscientiousness. So I don't think it's hypocritical for us mortals to want to try to be more militant about some of those habits. But to your point, it's also about knowing what your individual peaks are, because it's not as if you should only do that until you become a 209 marathoner. That's not going to happen for me. It's just never, it's just
Maybe on a
not
bike.
genetically, physically in the cards. Right. I'm on the damn bike. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if I could bike a 209 marathon right now. So it's very much, it's relative as well, but you make a good point, which is there's elements of just seeing how some of the pros, some of the experts in their various fields, we have expectations about what they do and they don't do, and seeing it play out in a way that involves sort of social learning because you're there, but involves you also trying and living and replicating, allows you to internalize those practices. The analogy I'll give you, it's not really an analogy, but the example, I suppose, is if you're a basketball fan and you went to like a practice or a one-on-one workout with one of your favorite professional players, you would see so many little things about how they do. Yeah, okay, you do drills too where you shoot, but how do they do this? And what is their coach telling them that their mind has to be focused on as they set their feet versus as they catch the ball? And what are the subtle differences they do? And, what do they do when they're really tired? Like actually seeing that and being next to that would be so much more valuable than, to your point, reading a book they published or even watching a video that they put on YouTube about what it's like to train with them, because there's another element to being there when they're not in performance mode that is really helpful, to be around pros and experts who are not in the mode of, hey, I'm being filmed for a thing right now.
Yeah, they're not.
I got to show up this way. Yeah, when their only goal is to do the thing with you and unlock it for you, it's very different. And I think that authenticity has a real impact on how it comes across.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Like I said, it's so fascinating I have a handful of friends who are pros here in Boston, but the volume in Boulder compared to Boston is just like out of control in terms of the magnitude. And so I've lived it a little bit here. I've seen I've run with a bunch of the BAA team and become friendly with some of them. But out in Boulder, it's like, you're you're on your Sunday run with, a 240 something marathoner, bunch of OTQ women, and, Jake Riley runs up behind you and, you're one stepping him. But then you're in it, and then what are you doing? How's your recovery going? What are you focusing on? All this stuff. And again, it's like you can't replicate the being in it. So hopefully Endeavorun can replicate the being in it, and hopefully it gets to a more broadly accessible experience with some larger brand or way to fuel, like, I don't want to say in depth, but more accessible experience.
I agree. And my hope is that a lot of the osmosis that you're talking about can happen for different attendees in different ways. I think that's one thing we've been really focused on. There are running camps out there that are centered around one person who's a big name in that space. And you go to like their camp really to kind of like meet them hear a couple of stories that, never quite made it onto a podcast because they're maybe a little racy or something like that, and take a selfie with them and, run in a nice place. And that, listen, I'm not knocking that. That's awesome. Like, that is a part of what we're doing, but we think it just needs to be a part of it. And so that's why we really targeted a group of experts with diverse backgrounds. So if you're really interested in coming to really think about like how to take your strength training or physiokinetics to the next level, we have experts. You can spend an hour or so sitting down and watching so help someone else with their form. If you want to meet exclusively with, our sports dietitian, Lydia is awesome and she really knows her stuff. And if you want to hear about, what Matt is thinking about and working on in the latest studies that he's, factoring into the training plans he's writing for athletes, he'll be there. And then we've got pros who are ultra marathoners. We've got 800 meter and milers there.
You're going to make them race? Pick the two ends of the spectrum and pick the middle?
Someone has mentioned this before, which was, one of the things we have on the schedule is a sort of pro run track workout on Friday morning. And that, it probably sounds more intimidating than it is. It's not like you have to be doing this. It's like you're going to do whatever workout you can handle that will push you, and not too crazy because we want you to be able to, run with us the rest of the weekend. But you're going to do it with the pros there, walking you through how they're warming up and what they're focused on and what their mental talk is like and how they're handling these reps and all that stuff. And so there'll be hopefully a couple of folks there who have some real speed. And so, yeah, the idea of seeing my buddy Riley Masters, who's a, 355 mile runner, compete against, Addie Bracey in, some sort of, what would I make them run? Like
30K.
Yeah. Like a 15K or something, right? Like I'd have to figure out what that distance is. Yeah, that's not a question. We might be able to get some behind the scenes. I wouldn't put anybody in the starting blocks in any serious way, but my also personal hope was that I could be there and be like fit enough to pick a distance short enough just to beat Bromka. That's one of my secret goals for the weekend. I think it might have to be like a 60-meter dash given my fitness at this point. I think I could take him out of the blocks, but anything over that, he would just run me down. So we'll see. Maybe it'll be like a 40 or something. Maybe we'll just get on the turf.
We'll get Boulder Body Worker on hand in case any of you tear a hamstring.
We'll need quite a medical team there. We actually have a participant who's kind of coming to help out, who is a registered nurse. Won't be registered by our program, but that is
pull your hamstrings off the track.
If you sprain an ankle, on Magnolia Road, there's someone there who is more informed than your average person to come help you get out of that.
Listen, there'll
be a lot of people there.
The only thing you need to be worried about at Magnolia Road is not vomiting on someone's front yard.
Yes, no, definitely. It's a backyard only vomiting situation. We are going to be very focused on that. I think you got to know that if you're buying property there, though, that you're going to get a certain amount of, right. It's sort of like when you buy an apartment in a college neighborhood and you're suddenly like, why is it noisy? It's Saturday night. Like you gotta know you're going to get a fair amount of runner's puke on your front lawn if you buy Magnolia Road.
My apologies. There was snow on the ground, so it was fine, I think.
Easy to just cover it up. Yeah. It's like dog poop,
Yeah, exactly. It washes away. Thanks again to PickyBars for sponsoring this episode. I've been a member of their monthly club subscription for years now and have a bar before all of my weekday runs, and also enjoy their oatmeal before long runs. Both are so easy on the road, too. If you'd like to support me and the podcast, Picky is offering you 20% off at pickybars.com/FTLR, which is good for all orders above $25 and an additional 20% off your first box of a new Picky Club membership. That's 20% off at pickybars.com/FTLR. Thanks again to Beam for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. As the days start to warm up and get longer, a cool down routine in the evening becomes even more important. Did you know that you can get a subscription to Beam's Dream Powder? It's what I use most nights before bed to help with a refreshing night's sleep. When you subscribe, you'll get the Dream Blend with a bunch of perks like even better pricing, free shipping, a free mug, and a drink frother just for signing up. Dream helps me wind down at night, and it's made with compounds like melatonin and magnesium that support a better night's sleep. Make sure to use the code FTLR at checkout for an extra 15% off the already discounted 20% off monthly rate. And now back to our conversation. Switching gears entirely from vomit and snow and dog poop,
Gladly.
as one does. Let's talk about your educational background and what you do professionally, because I feel like there's so much carryover between what you're facilitating here and what you're facilitating there.
Sure. Yeah. What you want me to just give you the rundown
Yeah, let's
of
get the
kind of
rundown.
how I got to be here? So
Why are you
educational
here?
background.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I'm on a dating show. Well, I graduated cum laude from Georgetown University with a bachelor's in philosophy. That's true. Actually, I originally thought of being a an academic philosopher or potentially law school. So I studied philosophy in undergrad, and then my interest in my master's work is in the field of organizational psychology. So it's really the application of psychology, social psych in particular, to typically the world of work, but sort of the way organizations, institutions, and groups run. And that led me into a field that's really focused a lot on team performance, human capital is sort of the terminology around sort of getting the most out of folks and giving them an opportunity to really flourish in the workplace. And in particular, I was really interested in leadership development and spent a few years facilitating leadership development workshops in the corporate world for the company I was working for. And that made me really want to go back to graduate school again and really focus in on leadership and adult development. And so my doctoral work, of which I'm still finishing up my dissertation, slowly but surely, is in the space of leadership and adult learning and development. And you're right. So a lot of the work that I do professionally with my firm, Ticonderoga Advisory, I would say about 30% or so is executive coaching. I work with a variety of executives across industries right now, media, finance. I'm working with a great client in agriculture, which was a space I knew really nothing about. That's been fascinating to learn about. Really coaching them for performance in their roles as executives. I spent probably another 40% of my time or so facilitating learning experiences. So sort of leadership development workshops, sometimes very, skill-based workshops. I'm excited to teach a great workshop on, creating meaningful and useful presentations, right? Something very tactical in that sense as well that I have coming up pretty soon that that is interesting. So I spent a lot of time actually leading group discussions, facilitating content management training, stuff like that. And then the other sort of 30% or so is an interesting hodgepodge of work that's related to that space. So I help with executive search. I'll use psychological testing to help place executives at different companies. Occasionally, I will help sort of do consulting around the sort of talent development or talent management space for executives who run those organizations. Uh, and so there's a bit of a mix of things in that space. I kind of just lump that together as retained advisory. And to your question, to your real central point is that both background and professional experience very much explicitly. I don't talk about it a lot, so I appreciate you giving me the forum to do it. I don't think anyone's typically that interested. So if any of your listeners are still here, you're welcome. But it's very explicitly tied to the way I've constructed Endeavorun. It's not just, hey, let's find a cool place with some cool people and that'll make it work. There's actually a pedagogy, there's an andragogy, if you will, to the way the weekend is structured to create a meaningful experience. I'm actually going to be running a workshop on sort of the psychology of goal setting that allows folks to kind of take a lot of what they've learned and ideally package it together with their own goals upon leaving to give them a working plan of what to do. The way that we'll be asking folks to do little things like how we take notes, how we reflect back on our own experiences, how we make commitments to plan. That's all from my professional and academic experience, learning about what makes learning stick, what allows people to transform in their approaches or mindsets, what allows people to be more cognizant and conscientious around their behaviors so that they're actually goal directed. And so a lot of the way that we're actually structuring the weekend, it's not some sort of secret nefarious thing, but it's meant to be the kind of thing that you isn't in your face but just works. A lot of the sort of workshop, if you will, that is the retreat is from that perspective and that in mind. And fundamentally, I'm about adults learning and developing, and I think growth physically in running can be very nicely tied to psychological and emotional development and growth that folks really seek and want. And to be able to kind of bring some theory to that, be pretty explicit about that, that's something I'm pretty excited about because I do think that certainly when I coach runners and coach them directly, not just sort of support runners sort of as an advisor the way I do for some of the local athletes and teams in the DC area, but occasionally I'll never really typically coach more than one or two athletes at a time that I'm directly coaching. But right from the beginning of doing that, my coaching approach to working with them was very much driven by the approaches I take in as executive coach working with seasoned leaders and professionals and translating that, adding a little bit of knowledge and expertise around running itself. But really, if you were working with me as a runner, it would not be like, okay, here's just this workout and here are these splits and, here's your rest and here's this. There'd be a lot more like, tell me what's driving this. It'd be a lot more question posing than it would be expertise giving, in a way that I think would probably throw some folks off. So I look at that differently.
I mean, that's coaching versus directing, right?
Well, I agree with you. I would say that if I'm being charitable, that's sort of like coaching in the executive sense versus coaching in the athletic sense, right? When you
Right.
think about athletic coaching, the first image that comes to mind, even outside running, is like
Stopwatch.
coach stopwatch and running, but like coach on the sidelines screaming at players, like, or in the huddle, on the sidelines, like being directive and teaching. And that sort of athletic coaching is really about, does the coach have knowledge and expertise, and can they disseminate in a fashion that allows their athletes to perform and succeed? And the executive coaching framework is almost entirely not about what you know as a coach and what knowledge you have that you can impart. That's, to your point, mentoring or directing or supervising at times. In the executive coaching space, it's really about, how do I unlock the potential by question posing, by listening, by reflecting, by sharing back, by examining the emotional elements of things as well as the pragmatic or rational
It's
side.
confidence and empowerment.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so I really see that as the core way I think about developing athletes. And I think there's some validity to it. I'm sort of tooting my own horn here, but I do think that with the exception of a handful of, really rare coaches who just have so much knowledge and wisdom that it is truly art that's better than science, most of the science is really well known, right? So if you're working with a Ben Rosario, a Scott Rasco, a Frank Gaggs, right? Like they have so much wisdom and knowledge that there's a sort of unquantifiable element to what they know that goes beyond anything you could read about in a good book around training. But if you're not one of those folks, most folks from a pure physiological development standpoint are going to get, sort of relatively speaking, the same kind of workouts. Oh, you're doing, 800s. All right. This person has 1Ks. All right. Huge difference, so I feel like the sort of knowledge about the running is much more knowable and attainable and frankly downloadable.
Right.
And it's the other elements that I think can really be the difference makers. So that's part of how I justify bringing that approach to coaching and developing runners, because I think a lot of the wisdom about like, all right, so go out at above threshold for 30 minutes is like, yeah, you can read that, for the most part. There are certainly some folks who kind of know much more than you could ever sort of just find digesting a lot of good material online. But I'm not one of those. So I rely on the sort of the wisdom of the experts in the crowd in that regard, and try to bring a different philosophy when actually interacting.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've only had two running coaches, and so I work with David Roche, and he's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the science of
Oh, yeah.
of performance. But we talk about running like 10% of the time, and the reason that I'm chasing the time that I'm chasing on Saturday is because he's helped me build the confidence in myself that like I can run those times and I can run those splits. Like I still can't believe that I ran a marathon in the sixes, but I did it. And on that day, I was confident in my ability, and maybe potentially also suspended belief a little bit. But again, that's the coaching, and like he helped me dream, as Bronca says all the time. Like it is about that dreaming, but marrying the dream in enough confidence in reality to actually execute on it. So I think all that's fascinating. I think the approach to coaching a human or an athlete or an employee, I think it's all in one and the same. There's so much data on endurance athletes being better employees. There was an Outside Magazine article about this a couple of years ago, and it interviewed a handful of executives that basically said, I'd rather hire an endurance athlete than not an endurance athlete because of this approach, right? It's the same way you train for a marathon is the same way you achieve a goal in the workplace. You can't get a task and do it to completion immediately if it's a large task or it's your, quarterly goal or annual goal or whatever. You do it one day at a time and you take a bite out of the elephant every day until you've consumed that elephant.
Which is illegal, by the way. I'm pretty sure that you can't eat elephants.
I was going to say, I need a better analogy for
apple, bite of the apple.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want you like subtly encouraging poaching here on the podcast. So that's not what I'm about. If that's the case, John, we're going to have to cut this short.
You're kicked out of the retreat.
Exactly. Yeah, this is a poacher-free retreat. I should state that off.
You have a lot of stipulations, and one of them
we do. We have a lot of requirements: vaccinations and no poaching. If you can't meet those requirements with us in Boulder,
you're not welcome.
For you. That's right.
Fair enough. So talk to me more about the. Actually, I'm curious your take on the endurance athletes as employees piece. I'm going to shut up now.
I remember somebody shared that with me, and I actually don't think I read it. So now you make me really want to go back and read it. Maybe we can share it in show notes as well for listeners. It makes a lot of sense. There's certain attributes, characteristics, I suppose is the best word for it, that would make one more successful as an endurance runner that I think would translate to a lot of performance in a lot of different workplace environments. Now, from my sort of academic background, right, the part of me that does executive search or something is thinking, all right, well, that's just, there's another element to this, which how much of that is sort of, state or trait, right? Is this really because of the training they do as endurance athletes that somehow build skills that translate to the workplace? Or is someone who is, predisposed to seek out that environment also predisposed to have some of the underlying traits around grittiness, perseverance, mental toughness that do translate? At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, right? The point is, if your question is, are you getting them or not?
The link is there.
I don't care whether it was the chicken or the egg, as long as there's some sort of poultry, right? Like that's sort of the only thing that really matters.
Not a vegan friendly episode, huh?
Not a vegan friendly episode. No, I appreciate, I was thinking of going vegan again. I did it for a couple months years ago and felt great. And I really ought to do that. But no, not a vegan friendly episode either. No poaching, no vegans. Although the overlap between poachers and vegans, that's not a Venn diagram that you typically.
Those are two separate circles.
With much overly, very different circles. Typically, I mean, it's a weird world we live in these days. But I agree. I mean, it certainly would seem to me that the characteristics that would make someone effective at building in endurance sports to their lives as a recreational athlete, I would imagine intuitively translate very nicely to things that require a good deal of perseverance, that require a good deal of self-discipline, of continuous learning, of fortitude. That said, you could also make the case that in certain environments, someone who's really attracted to endurance sports might be someone who enjoys or gets a lot more sustenance out of being by themselves for a while. And a lot of endurance athletes find it really appealing to be able to do their sports on their own. And if you're in an environment where you really need people to be embedded with others constantly to drive the outcomes you're looking for, it's possible that an endurance athlete in some ways might get burnt out by all of the interaction. I'm not suggesting that all endurance athletes are introverts or anything like that, but I could see arguments potentially to the contrary. So I really think, like anything else, there's not sort of one skill set that is really right for your average employee. It has to do with the culture of the organization, the nature of the role, and the performance that you're trying to achieve as a result of that. But if those align with some of the characteristics of endurance athletes, I would certainly be excited to see on the bottom of somebody's resume that they're a serious runner or a serious triathlete or swimmer or something like that.
Very cool. So I find all of that fascinating. I could talk about it for hours. I think my last question is going to be, fast forward 5 years, and what are you really proud of having accomplished?
First most obvious thing that comes to mind is just, if my daughter's happy and healthy I guess she'll be a 6-year-old at that point. I'll be proud. Mostly I'll be proud of my selection of my wife, because she's probably primarily responsible for my daughter's relative health thus far. So I'll be proud in a few realms if that's the case. But being a relatively new father is such a emotionally fascinating and overwhelming and typically the best ways kind of experience. So getting exciting to see my daughter learn and get excitement over just like the expansion of her world every day is wild. And so certainly that will be the first thing that comes to mind. I would say the second thing is with respect to Endeavorun. Well, I'll save that. Actually, I would say I better be done with my dissertation at that point. I'm hoping that we could talk a year from now and we'll be done. I'm actually getting closer to having my proposal hearing finally overrun. And for those not in the academic world, it basically means, you write the first like 80 pages or so of your dissertation, you get it approved, and then in my field, you actually conduct research study, go and in my case, interview a lot of people, code the results, write it up, analyze it, do the discussion, then defend that paper essentially and publish it. So hopefully a year from now that'll be done, and I'll be able to focus on some other areas. But I would say that the biggest thing that in 5 years I know I would tangibly want to look at, if Endeavorun is in a place where at minimum we're able to offer ideally multiple experiences throughout the year in different places, potentially for runners of different abilities or different focus. There's been some talk about putting together sort of a, uh, I don't know if I want to tease it that much. I'll be very coy here and say potentially one or two people I've talked to about putting on like a moms who run retreat, really geared at that. So there's all kinds of different directions that Endeavorun could go in, and it all starts at this point with just making awesome experiences from the get-go that are really focused on the outcomes of the attendees, and not the sort of financials. And so one of the things I've really worked hard to do is set up the business so that it runs in a way where we're not too worried about having to bring in X amount of people to break even or the thing goes under. Like we can really try to afford to focus on the community, the precision, the accountability that we can give folks, and hopefully the rest will come. That's sort of the nature of the business model to some extent as well, which is exciting. So ideally, yeah, that could be in a place where that's pretty sustainable. I would say a good metric for success, and we can have another pod in 5 years, hopefully before then, but certainly in 5 years, you can hold me to, is if enough of a culture is set up and enough of the idea is firm enough that I can step back from administrating the company and really focus on making sure the actual execution of the experiences themselves are great, either because I can facilitate some parts of them or just making sure we have great people doing those things. But ideally, if a real metric of success would be that others, or at least another person, is in there able to kind of run the show. And that will mean that I've at least created a starting point that someone else could add on to, or maybe even more maximally laid a vision and foundation that was translatable. So that's something I'm looking forward to. And it kind of motivates me every day to really deliver for everyone who's trusted us already to sign up and spend some time with us at this first event that we're doing in Boulder this summer. We've got some people who are awesome that have signed up, and I'm really excited for them, and I'm excited to kind of crush this Boulder event for them. And it's going to be really fun. It's during the Olympics, so we'll be, hanging out at breweries and watching the Olympic sports when we're not, running or at a book talk or nutrition workshop or something like that. So it's just going to be an awesome few days coming out of a pandemic where something like that has felt really foreign.
Living the dream out in Boulder. Well, appreciate you sharing your background, your expertise, and the vision that you have for this company and for the running community. And excited to see you in Boulder in a few weeks.
Thanks so much for your interest in having me. And for those who are still willing to be listening at this point, I appreciate it. And I really do hope to see many of you in Boulder. I think it is going to be an awesome experience. And if you have questions, just reach out to me directly and I'll make sure to get back to you as soon as I can. I
Awesome.
sound like I just left a voicemail message, right?
Please leave your name
this
and
is
number
Jake.
after
Please
the
leave me
beep.
number and I'll get back to you as soon as I get. Great. That's really how I wanted to end this. That's perfect. That's
so
excellent.
Where can we find you if we have questions or we'd like to follow along with your journey and learn from you?
Sure. So leave your name, phone number, and social security number you can email that to me, jake@endeavorun.com. You can reach out to me via email is great. I'm on Instagram at Hey Coach Potato is my handle. And I also occasionally check in with the Endeavorun Instagram handle. So you can send us a note there as well. I'm on Twitter as well, usually a little snarkier there than other places, but that sort of comes with the territory, I suppose. But I'm pretty easy to find. I have a really weird name. So generally speaking, there's not a lot of tubers out there. I don't know if there is another Jake Tuber out there. So if you can't remember anything I've just said, just Google my name and you will find some mechanism. You can send me a message on LinkedIn. Like I'll see it somehow.
I just made the connection between Hey Coach Potato and your last name. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's a little couch potato pun. Yeah,
Tubers,
it's
nice.
a little over the head for some folks, but I'm glad that you finally got
just
there.
landed.
That's good. This wasn't for nothing. Yeah.
Couple of years later. Jake, thanks so much for taking some time to chat, and we'll see you out there.
This was a blast. Thanks, man.
Of course. That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next time on For the Long Run, and in the meantime, happy trails. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too.